Hey guys, tonight we're slipping quietly into the streets of medieval Japan just before dawn. Picture this. The sky is still the color of soaked rice paper, a pale gray stretched thin over the low rooftops of Kyoto. You're not alone, never alone this early. Somewhere down the street, a monk stirs at his post near a wooden temple bell, and a fishmonger adjusts his cart under lantern light. Time, here, is a rumor told by shadows and the sudden clamor of ritual instruments. There are no clocks, yet everyone knows. It's nearly time to wake the city. You, however, are a traveler. Maybe a low-ranking retainer, maybe just a curious wanderer who bartered your way into this walled town. Your bedding's still warm, your eyes crusted with sleep. And yet, there it is, a distant, resonant thump like someone slapping a fat taiko drum with a lazy hand. You count. Once. Twice. That's the signal. The temple's dawn bell. Welcome to sunrise in the 12th century. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from somewhere far off, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing this sleepy little village stretch across the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You roll up your futon and pad across the tatami. There is no alarm clock, but the monk's drumming, the Jindaiko, has been honed for centuries. He strikes it with a rhythm handed down from older monks, who learned it from theirs, who may have learned it from wandering Koreans or Tang-era Chinese priests who brought more than scrolls across the sea. The drumming isn't just for you. It tells the whole Machiya quarter that dawn has arrived. But interestingly, the number of strikes can differ. Some monasteries go with 9, others 12. It depends not just on local custom, but also the season. Winter dawn comes late and dim. Summer dawns startle the world awake before you're ready. Time here is a flexible thing. The monk doesn't own it. He reads it, interprets it, like weather or poetry. You step into your Geta sandals, and the cool wood soothes your feet. The streets outside are still slick with dew. A neighbor creaks open her door and mutters something about hour of the hare. That's right, the old-time system is based on animals. 12 hours, each 2 modern hours long. The hour of the hare spans roughly 5 a.m. to 7 a.m., but that's only approximate. The key is the light. If the sun's begun to stain the garden walls, it's time for rice porridge. Historians still argue whether these early temple signals originated as public utilities or spiritual routines. Some believe the monks were the first civil timekeepers simply by accident, because they were always up. Others argue it was more deliberate, part of the Buddhist commitment to order, routine, and collective discipline. As you shuffle along, you pass a pair of city watchmen, swords at their sides, yawning in unison. Their shift just ended. You realize with a sleepy sort of awe, everyone here knows what time it is, and not a single soul owns a clock. One old man, perhaps a vendor of dried persimmons, has a wooden tablet around his neck. It reads Sunrise Watch, and it's his job to light the communal cooking fire. He does so with the patience of someone who knows the exact speed dry bamboo shavings will catch. Later, once the morning haze lifts, the marketplace will stir. But even now, the sequence of sounds unfolding around you, the drum, the bell, the shuffling of feet, has begun the day as surely as any alarm on your phone. And now, here's a fun fringe detail. In some mountain towns, before the big drums or bells, villagers used to station themselves at high lookout points. When the eastern sky shifted from black to purple, They'd call down using conch shells or hollow horns made from deer antlers. The result? A sleepy, spooky morning bleat that echoed down the valleys like a half-hearted ghost. You stroll toward the temple now, half to offer morning respect, half to see who else is around. There's already a small queue forming at the purification basin. One child has dropped her ladle and is squealing with laughter. Her mother hushes her. The monk at the gate smiles, his drumming hand still red from effort. He bows. You bow back, and then the second bell chimes. This one, thinner, higher, calls the novice monks to breakfast. You smell barley tea and rice steaming somewhere behind the temple's rear walls. You feel like you've earned breakfast just for waking up in the right rhythm. But here's the thing. Your right rhythm isn't universal. In Edo, modern-day Tokyo, that same dawn bell might sound half an hour later. Time in medieval Japan wasn't synchronized. Each village or castle town followed its own bell schedule. The concept of standard time wouldn't arrive until the Meiji Restoration, centuries later, when railways demanded consistent timetables and pocket watches appeared like tiny gods of precision. You spot a trader you met last night, hunched over a bowl of something that smells suspiciously like pickled plums. He waves you over. You're early, he jokes. You shrug. The monk woke me. He grins. Then blame Buddha if you're sleepy. And just like that, another day begins, not by seconds ticking forward, but by community unfolding around shared sound. You step away from the temple, belly full now with warm barley tea and a scoop of rice that somehow tastes better than it should. The drumming has stopped, replaced by the soft cooing of pigeons perched along the tiled eaves, and the occasional creak of a merchant's cart beginning its morning crawl. But if you listen closely, very closely, you'll hear something else, a bell. A single, resonant toll, rising faintly from the east side of town. You turn your head and wait. Another chime follows, fainter. Then another. These are not just pretty sounds. They are telling you something. Something very specific. Welcome to the elegant, oddly mathematical world of temple bell hours. You follow the sound, weaving through alleys and side streets still glistening with morning mist. The city is stirring now. A pair of apprentices sweep dust from a shop front, grumbling softly about someone breaking a sake jar last night. A trio of noble women pass, flanked by attendants, their conversation light and oddly conspiratorial. And over it all, like the spine of a song, chime the shoro, the towering bell pavilions that govern time with grace. You might assume the bells chime hourly. You'd be wrong. The Japanese timekeeping system before the arrival of Western mechanical clocks wasn't built on fixed hours. Instead, it followed unequal hours, a system in which daytime and nighttime were each divided into 6 segments, regardless of how long the sun stayed in the sky. That means, in summer, an hour could stretch nearly 2.5 of our modern hours. In winter, barely 40 minutes. You now understand why a rice farmer might call it the accordion day. Historians still argue whether this was a Confucian inheritance, a Buddhist adaptation, or something more local and agricultural. What we do know is that the bell system had to adapt. You reach a particularly grand temple, a sprawling Zen complex with pristine white gravel paths and tall cypress trees. A novice monk sits in a raised wooden platform halfway up the belfry, eyes fixed on a sun clock, a simple wooden dial carved with the season's shadow lines. He waits, then nods, then pulls the thick rope that sends the bell swinging clong. That sound, that weighty reverberation, signals more than just time. It's a rhythm for the soul. Merchants tally it to know when to open their doors. Nobles use it to time their poetry readings. Street performers wait for it before launching into puppet plays. And households, they listen for their favorite tone to start the laundry. Every bell is different, and part of that difference lies in Tsurigane, the giant, suspended bronze bells. These weren't rung with a clapper inside, but struck from outside with a wooden beam, often suspended horizontally like a battering ram. This created a deep, vibrating tone that could be heard for miles. Some villages counted not just the number of bell strokes, but how long the tone lingered in the mist. You pause beneath one of these bell towers, watching a boy kneel with a bucket of ashes. He's maintaining the sun gauge, adjusting it for the season. That's right, keeping time in medieval Japan required constant seasonal recalibration. You couldn't just set it and forget it. Timekeeping was a job, a spiritual task, and a community service rolled into one that a scholarly-looking man with ink-stained hands, perhaps a calligrapher, whispers to you, "This bell, it's tuned to the hour of the horse." That would be around noon, roughly, but you both know it's flexible. He then adds, "They say, long ago, a monk tuned it by ear to match the croak of a temple frog." You nod, uncertain whether he's joking. Probably is. Possibly not. That here's your quirky tidbit. Some temples train blind monks to manage time by sound alone. Their heightened hearing allowed them to calibrate the echo of the bell, compensating for humidity and wind. That's not just folklore. It's recorded in some temple scrolls, with proud notes about seeing through sound. Now, time for a brief detour, because you deserve a laugh. Once, in a distant town, a particularly boastful monk claimed he could tell the time by sniffing incense smoke. Naturally, he was put to the test. Unfortunately, on the appointed morning, someone switched his incense with dried cabbage leaves. Legend says he called out, "Hour of the ox," at the exact moment it was rooster. You sit now on the low wall of the temple garden, watching as townsfolk pause in their paths at each bell tone. A woman selling persimmons straightens her cart after the second ring. A child scurries home with a loaf of barley bread, glancing nervously toward the west. Somewhere, a samurai sighs and adjusts his scabbard, annoyed he's late for an audience. And here's the quiet beauty of it all. They are synchronized not by machines, but by sound. The city breathes together. The bells don't impose time. They suggest it, politely, sonorously, and only a little smugly at a final note. Scholars still debate whether these bells were ever standardized across regions. Some argue for a central temple authority issuing time charts. Others say each temple tuned itself like a jazz musician, listening to nature, watching the sky, and following the heartbeat of the town. You rise from the wall, refreshed. You haven't looked at a clock. There isn't one. But still, you know what time it is. Because the bell told you. And that's enough. You drift westward now, drawn by rumor and scent. Someone mentioned a shrine with a water basin that tells the time. It sounds absurd, but so far everything about this city has been an elegant blend of poetry and practicality. So why not? The alley bends, the air shifts. The crowds thin as you enter a quieter neighborhood, where the roofs are older and the gardens feel less manicured. The shrine rises ahead of you, not grand like the Zen temple earlier, but endearing in its own way. Its gate leans ever so slightly to one side, and the stone fox statues out front have seen better centuries. You pass through the torii gate, bow instinctively, and your eyes fall on it. The rikoku, a bronze vessel about the size of a soup pot, filled with water and perched atop a cedar pedestal. A narrow bamboo spout drips precisely into the bowl. Plink, plink, plink. This is no decorative fountain. It's an ancient water clock, and it's quietly ticking the morning away that a small placard nearby offers an explanation. Sort of. It reads, "As the drops fall, so pass the hours. When the bowl overflows, it is time to pray." You sit beside it, fascinated. The concept is surprisingly simple. Regulate water flow to measure time. But the execution? That's the marvel. The bamboo spout has been hollowed just right to allow a specific number of drops per minute. The shape of the bowl accounts for splashing. The overflow channel is carved to signal a minor bell inside the shrine, just loud enough to alert the nearby caretaker. You watch it for 10 minutes. The rhythm is soothing. The water darkens slightly where it gathers, catching a curl of incense smoke. If this shrine were near your home, you think you'd visit every day just to hear it. Historians still debate where these water clocks came from. Some argue they were inspired by Chinese clepsydras, sophisticated vessels used at court. Others believe Japan's versions were far simpler, grassroots inventions, born in monasteries or forest shrines. The truth, perhaps, is both that at their peak, these clocks weren't just for timing rituals. They were used to divide daily tasks, space out chanting cycles, even schedule visits from important guests. A wealthy samurai might commission his own private water clock, hiring an artisan to carve one from granite, complete with etched markings and a tiny wooden fish that floated as the level rose. Today, the shrine's version is humble, but no less effective. The caretaker appears, an elderly man with eyebrows like silver caterpillars. He nods at you and gently lifts the bowl to pour it into a waiting jar, resetting the clock. Ninth segment. He murmurs. You ask how he keeps the drip calibrated. He chuckles and pulls from his sleeve a wad of moss. "I changed the plug," he says, pointing to the end of the bamboo tube. "Dry moss drips faster. Wet moss, slower. Weather changes, so the clock must listen." There's something beautiful in that. The idea that a timepiece isn't fixed, but reactive. In this world, time isn't a dictator. It's a conversation. A scholarly tidbit. Some court records mention competitions between shrines to see who could build the most accurate water clock. One account describes a match where a monk accused another of adding vinegar to the water, making it denser and slower dripping. The scandal rocked their province for weeks. You stay at the shrine longer than you intended. The birds are louder now, and the air warmer. You wonder if the water clock ever froze in winter. It must have. Did time stop when it did? The caretaker answers your question before you ask. In snow season, he says, we switch to a candle clock. Of course they do. He beckons you inside, and you enter a small side room. There, on a low lacquered tray, is a long candle marked with faint black lines. Each mark burns in 30 minutes, he explains. We light it at breakfast. By the 5th mark, it's tea time. Now you're in deep. You ask, quietly, if you might stay to watch it burn. He nods, disappearing to fetch tea. You sit cross-legged and gaze at the flickering flame. The wax weeps. The room smells like cedar and old ink, and for the first time in a long time, you realize you are completely free of minutes, seconds, alerts, notifications, buzzes. The time here isn't told. It's felt. As the candle mark fades and the water clock resets, you rise, bow, and step once more into the street. You're not late. You're precisely where you're meant to be. The streets are livelier now, traders calling out prices, children dashing through puddles, a monkey on a leash performing clumsy bows for coins. And yet, no one hurries. No one glances at a watch. That's because time in this world flows like a river shaped by seasons. It's not chopped into rigid pieces. It expands and contracts, breathes and sighs. And nowhere is this more evident than in the quiet genius of seasonal timekeeping. You turn down a shaded road bordered by plum trees. Their blossoms are gone now. Early summer has arrived. The scent of rain and wet bark lingers in the air. You're headed to the home of a government scribe, an older man known for keeping one of the best Nichiji charts in the district. These charts, meticulously drawn calendars, outline not only the changing dates of festivals and moon phases, but also track the shifting length of hours across the year. When you arrive, the scribe welcomes you with a nod and a plum-flavored rice cake. His home smells of ink and vinegar. He shows you a scroll, unrolling it across a low writing desk. "Look here," he says, pointing with a brush handle. "Summer hours grow long like beans. Winter hours? They shrink like frost-bitten fingers." He's not joking. In the traditional Futii Jiken system, Japan divided the day into 6 daylight hours and 6 nighttime hours. But since sunrise and sunset change with the seasons, these hours were unequal. In winter, daytime hours were short and snappy. In summer, they stretched luxuriously. Noon always stayed in the middle, but everything else swelled or shrank around it, like breath in a sleeping giant. Historians still debate exactly how common people kept track of these seasonal shifts. Some claim charts like this one were only for officials and scholars. Others argue that even farmers used rough versions drawn with charcoal on the sides of grain barrels. Your host tells you that he adjusts his house's hour markers every 10 days or so. A rope outside his home is tied with paper tags, each one indicating the sun's angle at a different seasonal hour. Today's tag is already fluttering in the breeze, tied lower than last week's. Here's your odd little gem. Some elite households hired time whisperers, retired monks or shrine keepers who would visit weekly to recalibrate sundials and candles based on the season. They were paid in rice, pickled plums, or, in one case, a live goose. Back in your sandals, you thank the scribe and step outside. The sun's climbed high now. You pass a garden wall painted with faded kanji, poetry about dew and dragonflies. Beside it, a boy is tying knots into a rope stretched across bamboo poles. He looks up. "My mother says we're in the long hour season now," he says proudly. "That means I can stay outside until the bell rings 5 times. You laugh and nod. Children always find ways to turn calendars into freedom. And speaking of calendars, you learn that towns kept seasonal time drums, too. These weren't the same daily bells and gongs as before. Instead, they were larger drums mounted in town squares and struck once at the solstices, equinoxes, and cross-quarter days. The rhythm? That changed too. A slow triple beat for spring, a rolling echo for autumn. One town even had a reverse beat, a signal that the days would now begin shrinking instead of growing. Imagine it. A drumbeat that reminds you not just of when you are, but where you are in the grand breathing cycle of the year. In the outskirts of town, farmers use shadows instead of bells. One old woman, squatting in her sweet potato patch, shows you a wooden rod stuck into a flat board. When the shadow touches this notch, she says, "I stop digging." Her board has 3 notches, one for each season she plants. The last one, she whispers, is for rest. Modern time demands accuracy, but seasonal time invites attentiveness. Back near the river, fishermen used tide charts, not printed, but carved onto long sticks they plant in the mud. These not only measure water height, but help them guess when certain fish will arrive. This stick says the carp will be lazy today, one laughs. But I'm still going to try. And what about the city entertainers, the puppeteers, dancers, storytellers? They time their acts by light quality. One actor you meet, heavily painted and squinting at the sky, mutters, almost soft shadow hour. Good for tragic endings. So many ways to know when to begin something. Or to end it, here's your fringe detail for the day. In some regions, the start of summer was announced not by a bell or a drum, but by a songbird. The ugisu, Japanese bush warbler, was seen as the seasonal herald. A man in charge of local time keeping might be sent into the hills in early May just to listen for the first cry. Until then, no one changed the hour ropes. You climb a small ridge, finding yourself beside a shrine whose priest watches the clouds. He doesn't say much, but he hands you a scroll. On it, a single brushstroke sketch of the sun, wide and soft, hovering over a line of reeds. The kanji beneath it reads, "Time is the season's breath." That feels just right. It's nearly midday now, though you wouldn't know it from the sun. It's hiding behind gauzy clouds, casting a milky glow over everything. Still, something shifts in the city's rhythm. You feel it in your shoulders, in the way a shopkeeper pauses to wipe his brow, in the sudden smell of grilled mackerel wafting down a narrow street. You're in the domain of a most curious institution, the midday officer rounds. You wander toward the town's main thoroughfare, the chatter of vendors growing louder. There's a sort of gentle urgency here, not rush, exactly, but anticipation. That's because the Hikamawari Yaku, or the Time Walkers, are about to make their midday pass. These men are part town crier, part civil servant, part human timepiece, and they stroll the streets announcing the passage of hours with astonishing regularity and flair. And you thought your job had odd hours. The officer you spot first wears a light summer robe, cinched neatly, with a sash that holds a bamboo scroll case. On his back is a small gong, and in one hand, a staff topped with jingling metal discs. He's not alone. His assistant follows close behind, bearing a tray with tokens meant for city officials who must record the hour. They begin their call. Not a shout, but a melodic chant. Hour of the horse, half past. Hour of the horse, half past. That means it's somewhere around 12:30, though again, only approximately. These men don't carry watches. They rely on seasonal sundials set up around the city, plus their own deep familiarity with the sun's arc, and perhaps a little divine intuition. Historians still debate how accurate these time walkers were. Some argue they made frequent errors, especially on cloudy days. Others claim their observational skills rivaled astronomers. A few eccentric scholars suggest they were trained using incense clocks and forced to memorize the burn time of 50 varieties. There's no solid proof, but it makes a great story. The townspeople take them seriously, though not solemnly. Children bow as they pass, merchants nod and adjust their stalls, and a noodle seller grumbles, "Too late again, my broth's gone bitter." One time walker bows an apology. Clouds were thick. We consulted the bell tower. That's right. On uncertain days, the time walkers stop at the city's main temple to coordinate with the monks' bells. It's a lovely example of overlapping systems. Bell, water clock, candle, shadow, human memory, all functioning together, like instruments in a very sleepy orchestra. You've fallen behind them for a while. They move slowly, pausing at corners to give their chant. It's a performance, but also a duty. At one point, the officer even kneels to consult a slab of polished stone with an embedded metal rod. the local sundial. He frowns, calculates, and mutters something to his assistant, who adjusts the tokens in his tray. Quirky detail time. In one region, time walkers used trained crows. I'm not joking. The birds were taught to caw at specific locations, using food incentives. It didn't last. The birds got lazy, or perhaps too clever. One report claimed a crow started mimicking the town crier's chant to get extra rice balls. Chaos ensued. You ask one officer how long he's been doing this. 23 years, he says proudly. I once called the hour during a typhoon and only got slightly concussed. You raise your eyebrows. Bell fell. Missed me by this much. He holds up 2 fingers the width of a dragonfly. There's a theatricality to the whole process. The officers are part of the city's soundscape. Like cicadas or distant drums, they become something the ear expects. One woman tells you she uses their chant to time her laundry rinse. Another, a seamstress, sets her lunch break by it. Unless they're off again, she adds with a smirk. You ask if the officers ever get complaints. They do. One man apparently shouted "Hour of the Goat" instead of "horse" during a busy festival and was pelted with bean cakes. But by and large, they're respected. Because when they speak, the city adjusts. Bakers time their kneading. Children race home. Even samurai nod from their gates, acknowledging the invisible wheel of hours. And here's your scholarly debate for the day. Was this system more precise than early European mechanical clocks? Some say yes. When properly trained and supported, time walkers offered better seasonal accuracy than inconsistent gears. Others argue the opposite, citing human fallibility and the chaotic nature of shared oral timekeeping. The truth probably lies, as usual, in the middle. Or, fittingly, at midday. You leave the officers behind as they turn toward the bridge, chanting still. The echo bounces off tiled roofs and water wheels. You smile. Time is a song, and today, it's sung in a key just slightly off tune, but all the more charming for it. The sun's high now, though it rarely beams directly. Too much haze and too many soft clouds drifting like idle courtiers across the sky. You've wandered toward a quieter district, one laced with canals, where wooden walkways crisscross over shallow streams and willows droop their long fingers into the water. Here, time isn't sung or struck. It's measured in ripples. Welcome to one of medieval Japan's most peculiar methods of timekeeping. The canal flow gauges. You wouldn't expect a watery alleyway to double as a clock, but in cities like Kyoto and Kamakura, where irrigation and transportation were twin necessities, canals took on another subtle role. Some civil officials, particularly those overseeing agriculture or garden estates, gauged the hour by watching how long it took water to reach certain markers. It wasn't exact, of course. Nothing here ever is. But it was consistent enough for a culture that measured time by flow, not fixation. You sit on a worn wooden bench beside a particularly charming canal. A series of bamboo poles has been driven into the stream, spaced at irregular but purposeful intervals. One has a red cloth tied near its base. Another is marked with kanji painted in ash ink. An older man with sun-wrinkled skin and a casual air of command arrives carrying a clay teapot and a small hourglass, not with sand, but with crushed rice grains. "You're here for the clock, aren't you?" he asks with a grin that he explains. In the morning, we open the upstream gate. The water flows through the canal. By the time it touches the fourth post, there, it's the third quarter of the horse hour. You blink. That's around 12:45 p.m. if you had a modern watch. But he doesn't care about conversions. He watches the water the way a farmer watches the sky, with trust, Historians still argue whether this method was ever officially endorsed. Some claim it was merely a local custom, what you might call folk time. Others suggest tax records and delivery schedules were once arranged based on these watery checkpoints. A few scattered texts describe flow readings taken at city gates, particularly in times of drought, when exact irrigation schedules mattered more than bell strikes. You watch as the water reaches the fifth pole. The man nods, sips his tea, and scribbles a note onto a flat slate using chalk made from charred yams. His job? Canal steward. His responsibility? Make sure the water doesn't move too quickly, flooding fields, or too slowly, starving the lotus ponds. He claims he can feel changes in current by dipping in just his pinky toe. You don't ask for a demonstration. You believe him that here's your quirky fact. One district once employed carved wooden ducks as floating time indicators. The ducks were hollowed out and filled with weighted pebbles, so they bobbed their way downstream at a predictable pace. If duck number 3 arrived at the weir by midday, all was well. If not, someone upstream was in trouble. You follow the canal path, watching as the water ripples gently past a cluster of tea houses. One owner explains that her delivery boys use the canal gauge to time their route. If the water passes the bridge post, I know they'd better be back by now, she says. Otherwise, no dumplings for them. Further down, a carpenter is adjusting a lattice beneath a small spillway. He's creating a water harp, thin slats that hum as the water trickles through them. He tells you it's not just for ambience. The pitch changes with the flow. Low and slow. Midday. High and fast. Morning rush. You lean in, and sure enough, there's a faint hum, like wind flirting with a flute. He adjusts one slat slightly, and the tone deepens. It's hypnotic. And what about winter, you ask? Does the canal still serve as a clock when it's frozen? The steward chuckles. We switch to fire and ash, he says. He shows you a small brazier used to melt a drip onto stone markers. Each pooled drop takes roughly the same time to spread, provided the wind isn't too playful. You cross a narrow plank bridge and pause to watch a young girl drop petals into the canal. It's how I race my brother, she whispers. But grandfather says the petals are really time boats. That feels just about right. Scholars sometimes dismiss canal clocks as unreliable, but they miss the point. These weren't clocks, they were relationships. People knew the water, its moods, its memories, its timing. It taught patience and precision, but never perfection. It wasn't time measured. It was time felt. You sit again, legs dangling over the water, and close your eyes. The canal gurgles gently beneath you, carrying hours downstream. You realize, this might be the first time you've been on time for everything, just by letting time carry you. The canal fades behind you now, its gentle gurgle replaced by something stranger, a rising chorus of chirps and whistles, some bird-like, others more performative. You're entering the district where animal sounds, not bells or water, tell time. Or rather, imitations of animal sounds. This is the curious world of cuckoo-like bird calls, where timekeepers blend mimicry, tradition, and a dash of theatrical flair. You first hear it just past a weaving shop, a long, trilling coo-coo-coo, followed by a pause, then another, lower-toned kwee-twee-twee. It echoes off the alley walls, makes you pause in mid-step. A shopkeeper catches your puzzled look and grins. Hour of the rooster, he says, nodding toward a figure perched on a low rooftop. There, standing with the poise of a kabuki actor and a small bamboo trumpet in hand, is a professional bird cry time caller. You walk closer. He sees you and offers a slight, bow before releasing another carefully practiced warble. "The morning birds guide us," he says between calls. "Not the real ones, the ones in our breath." It sounds poetic, and maybe it is. This neighborhood, according to the baker who hands you a rice bun, has relied on stylized bird calls for centuries. Some scholars believe it began as a game, children mimicking cuckoos, cranes, and crows to annoy their parents. Over time, it formalized into a kind of community clock that at certain hours, trained callers walk specific paths through the district, delivering signature bird sounds to mark the passing of time. It's not unlike the bell monks or time walkers, but instead of chants, these performers use vocalized chirps, clicks, and occasional whistles shaped with delicate ceramic pipes. Historians still argue about how far this practice spread. There's debate over whether it was unique to Kyoto's artisan quarters or whether similar practices existed in Edo and smaller coastal towns. Some documents mention mimic monks in Hokkaido who used owl hoots for evening hours, but evidence is sparse. What is clear is that these bird call timekeepers were part performance, part precision. You meet one such caller, a spry woman in her 60s who carries a small wooden box full of mouthpieces, each tuned to a different avian tone. She gives you a demonstration, cooing like a dove for the hour of the snake, around 9 a.m., then chirping like a bush warbler for the hour of the horse. Her tools? A reed pipe made from lake bamboo, a bit of beeswax, and a truly excellent sense of rhythm. "You can't fake a crane," she says. "The air has to feel like a crane." Here's your quirky detail. One famed time caller was also a noodle vendor. He would mimic bird sounds to sell his noodles, but only at the appointed hour. If you heard the cuckoo, it meant the broth was ready. If you heard the heron, too late, he was packing up. Locals started setting their day by his chirps. The tradition has its rules. Each bird corresponds to a specific hour pair, and callers are expected to maintain vocal discipline. Too many trills? You've rushed the hour. Not enough warble? Someone might think it's earlier than it is. And heaven forbid you combine two birds. In one anecdote, a young apprentice tried blending hawk and pigeon calls for dramatic flair. He was promptly demoted to bell maintenance duty. You stroll beside one of the callers now, a young man in a blue tunic with a strap of whistles across his chest like arrows. He tells you he apprenticed for 2 years before being allowed to speak the crane. His teacher once refused to let him mimic a heron because his larynx was too anxious. They take this seriously, but here's the soft magic in it. As the calls ring out, people react. A fishmonger wraps his eels in woven grass. A potter sets down her brush. Children in an alley giggle and try to echo the latest chirp, sounding more like frogs than birds. It's not about being exact. It's about being together. You reach a small courtyard where callers gather to switch shifts. They trade notes. Literally, small slips detailing unusual bird sightings or changes in wind that might affect their range. One young woman says, "Too humid for the pheasant call today." Sounds like sneezing. You sit in the corner and listen as they practice. It's like birdsong, yes, but also theater, community, ritual. In a city without clocks, these human calls become part of the environment, as expected and comforting as sunrise. And if you're wondering, yes, there's scholarly debate. Some argue this was never a true time system, just colorful local color. Others suggest these calls were coordinated with temple bells, designed to blend cultural signaling with entertainment. A few radical theorists believe it may have been a resistance to imposed time regulation, an audible declaration of independence from the bell-ringing elite. As for you, you're content to hear the next warble drift across the tiled roofs. You don't check a dial. You don't ask for the time. You simply close your eyes and let the birds, real or otherwise, carry you through the hour. The sun has begun its slow, lazy descent now, slanting across the roof tiles and stretching the shadows of lantern posts like tired cats. It's the kind of afternoon where even the cicadas seem to sigh. And for those not watching the canal or listening for cranes, there's another way to tell the hour, by the heartbeat of drum beats echoing through the wooden walls of inns. You've stepped into the sonic realm of innkeeper drum beats. The street you're on is lined with Hadigo, modest roadside inns, usually 2 stories tall with paper shutters and the smell of pickled vegetables forever trapped in their wooden beams. A small boy sweeps the step outside one such inn, pausing every few strokes to glance up the road. He's not waiting for a guest, he's waiting for the beat. You ask him why. He shrugs. Because that's when I take the fish off the fire. Sure enough, a few moments later, a low, measured dawn rolls out from a nearby open window. Not hurried, not loud, just confident enough to be felt in your ribs if you stand close. The innkeeper, an elderly woman with arms like a laundry press, leans out from the window and shouts, "Second bell." Dango's ready. In this district, as in many parts of medieval Japan, innkeepers were informal timekeepers, not just for their guests, but for the neighborhood. Their drums, usually made from deer hides stretched tight over cedar frames, became sonic anchors. They weren't designed to match official time, but rather to mark transitions. Tea is ready, baths are filled, evening is near. The drums varied in tone and rhythm depending on the season, occasion, or even the whim of the owner. One used a triple tap for summer guests, a slower beat in winter, and a double echo pattern during festival days. Some were even personalized. A traveling merchant once requested a bean paste beat so he wouldn't miss the snack window. The innkeeper obliged, with a rhythm so catchy that other lodgers began using it as their afternoon cue. 2. Historians still argue whether drums were ever coordinated with official time signals, or whether they were purely autonomous. Some evidence points to festivals where town drums and drums were synchronized for parades and rituals. Other records suggest a more casual connection, like 2 friends across rooftops sharing music, not metrics. You pass one in where a drum is mounted vertically beside the door. Visitors are expected to strike it upon entry. A small sign reads, 3 taps for arrival, 1 for request of rice. Inside another, a wall calendar has been painted directly onto the plaster, with circles indicating which days the drumbeat changes pitch. The innkeeper, a woman with only one good eye and an alarming fondness for chili vinegar, shows you the mallets she uses, 1 for soft guests, 1 for noisy ones. You're not sure which category you fall into. And then there's the food drum. Yes, that's right. In some inns, the kitchen drum was separate from the guest drum. It served as a kind of stove timer for large rice pots, miso reduction, or even tofu draining. One inn, famed for its sweet egg custard, used a 7-beat signal passed down from a retired monk who'd apparently meditated upon yolks. Here's a quirky gem. In coastal inns, some proprietors added shell chimes to their drums, clamshells strung around the rim to jingle with each beat. Locals said the echo helped pull in the tide. More likely, it just sounded pleasant. But it's easy to believe a drum might influence the sea in a world where time is a matter of rhythm. One old guest book you glimpse mentions a merchant who traveled with his own drum skin. He'd asked the innkeeper to swap it in, so the tone reminded him of home. Another anecdote involves a dramatic midnight guest demanding an emergency beat to mark an urgent dumpling meditation. No one quite knew what that meant. The innkeeper gave him tea instead. Now here's where it all ties together, because while each inn had its own rhythm, many coordinated loosely with neighborhood tea houses, bathhouses, and even couriers. If the afternoon drumbeat rang, the bathhouse might wait 5 minutes before heating the water. Tea houses would open their shutters just as the last beat faded. This allowed a sort of informal schedule to unfold, day after day, with no clocks, no texts, and definitely no alarms. Scholars sometimes refer to this as networked rhythm ecology, a fancy term for what you're experiencing. A city stitched together by habit and heartbeat. You sit now on the veranda of one such inn, sipping barley tea that tastes faintly of pine. The drum hangs beside you, silent now, its surface worn smooth by decades of ritual. A cicada clicks its own odd tempo in the tree above. Somewhere down the road, another drum begins to call. It's slower, more final. The day is winding down. And you? You're perfectly in sync. Dusk has begun to drape its soft shawl over the rooftops, tinting the streets with amber and lavender. Lanterns are being lit, one by one, like stars rehearsing for their evening performance. It's a beautiful hour, the light neither full nor gone, the air no longer hot, but not yet cool. It's also time for the marketplace bell traders. You find yourself approaching a long, sloping street that curves like a lazy river into the town's main square. This is no bustling bazaar. It's a humming sort of market, with stalls shaded by linen and bamboo, merchants calling gently rather than shouting, and a smell somewhere between fried tofu and crushed mint leaves. The crowd is relaxed. The pace is strolling, not stampeding. And then, ding ding, dinged out a small bell, delicate and oddly rhythmic, sounds from the far side of the market. People pause, listen. Some traders shuffle to straighten their wares. A few customers begin drifting in the direction of the chime. The bell trader has arrived. You see him now, a middle-aged man in a layered robe, the hem stiff with dust, his arms adorned with rows of tiny bells like a walking wind chime. He doesn't shout. He doesn't need to. His bells do the talking. Each bell is tuned differently, some bright and chirpy, others low and sonorous. As he walks, he taps them with thin, flexible wooden sticks, creating a rolling sequence of notes. The pattern tells you what time it is. Not by modern standards, of course, but by market logic. Tea hour, bargaining hour, snack lull, and last call stroll. You follow him, fascinated. This isn't just performance, it's function. He stops at certain vendor clusters, switches rhythm, adds a bell or two. You realize he's not marking time in the abstract. He's triggering activity. The pickle seller begins cutting samples. The lamp oil vendor lowers her price tags. The fishmonger lifts the cloth from his final tray. Historians still debate whether these bell traders were town-appointed or self-organized. Some say they were originally food hawkers who got creative. Others believe they were tied to guilds or shrine musicians. One theory suggests they were failed monks who took their rhythm training into commercial life. Whatever their origins, they became trusted auditory beacons. You approach a nearby stall, brightly painted fans, and the merchant grins. He's playing the snack pattern, she says, pointing at the bellman. Time to make my sesame balls. She disappears into the back. The bell rings thrice more. Another rhythm starts, short, quick, almost dance-like. A potter down the street begins laying out his last wares. A child rushes to buy a rice cake. The bell trader has trained the marketplace to respond. The sequence is known, even if never formally taught. It's absorbed, like lullabies or lull in a conversation. And here's a particularly delightful twist. Each bell pattern is unique to its district. If you crossed into a different ward, the rhythms would change. Faster, slower, more ornamental, even humorous. Some areas used animal mimic bells, where a dog bark rhythm marked end of day. One place supposedly had a catnap cadence, 3 slow chimes followed by a meow-like ding to nudge old men from their benches. You speak briefly with the bell trader. His voice is soft, but musical. He's been walking this market for 17 years. I don't keep a clock, he tells you. I follow the noodles. When the broth bubbles, I begin. And that's not just a charming phrase. Some traders literally signal him. A sweet vendor might burn an extra smoky stick of incense. A rice dealer may leave a specific pattern of sesame seeds on his counter. These signs tell the bell trader when to start his next loop, like cues in a wordless play. Here's your quirky tidbit. During a particularly rainy season, one bell trader in Edo reportedly used floating bells, small tin chimes tethered to a kite-like paper boat. He floated them through shallow street streams to preserve his rhythm. The children followed, of course, and accidentally created a minor parade. As twilight deepens, the bell trader performs his final round. The rhythm is slow, fading, like a lullaby for commerce. Vendors begin packing up. A woman ties bundles of green onions in time with the chimes. A tea stall offers its last steep cup. A beggar collects coins by tapping a spoon against a borrowed bowl, echoing the final notes. You sit on the rim of a low stone basin, sipping the tea that's been handed to you for no particular reason. The market is folding itself down like a paper crane, elegant and inevitable, and the bell? Still echoing faintly, a musical reminder that even endings can be beautiful if they have rhythm. Night is beginning to settle like ink poured gently over a scroll, slowly, methodically, saturating every crevice and corner. Lanterns glow like fireflies pinned along narrow lanes. The city exhales, and in this hush, a new figure emerges, not cloaked in performance or poetry, but in quiet vigilance. You're about to meet the samurai watchmen, the unofficial sentinels of night, and guardians of time after the bells stop ringing. You notice the change not by sound, but by the way people behave. Shops close with softer clinks. Conversations lower to murmurs. And near the Old North Gate, 2 men pass in silent unison, swords at their sides, eyes like oil lamps just beginning to flare. They aren't patrolling for crime alone. They're also keeping the hour. And in this period before mechanical clocks, that makes them indispensable. The samurai watch isn't a formal police force, though it resembles one. Most large towns and castle cities employed yakinban, or night duty samurai, to maintain order, respond to fires, and yes, track the passage of hours using prescribed night rounds. These rounds weren't random. They followed routes marked by auditory cues, visual markers, and sometimes even celestial signs. You fall into step behind one such watchman, his get a clicking against the stone. Every so often, he stops, adjusts a shutter, or listens to the wind. Then, clack, he strikes a wooden night block suspended from his hip. The sound is sharp, hollow, unmistakable. One strike, then silence, then another. It's not a message. It's a marker, the first hour of the DOG.IN, the seasonal hour system. The night had 6 divisions like the day. This one, the dog hour, corresponds roughly to 7 to 9 p.m. But the samurai's cue isn't a bell or a drum. It's the sound of wood against wood, carried through alleys and down into sleeping homes. Historians still argue whether these night markers were standardized across domains or highly local. Some sources suggest the shogunate issued night call templates. Others insist each town developed its own beat. What's consistent, however, is the symbolic authority. When the night block echoes, the hour is official. Even if the moon disagrees, the watchman you're following wears a crest of woven reeds on his sash, symbol of the district patrol. His companion carries a signal lantern, shaded so its glow doesn't disrupt sleep. You ask about the sound blocks. He shows you three, one large, one slim, one shaped like a miniature temple gong. Different hours, he says. Different tone. Some of us sing them, too. Sing, yes. In some regions, samurai would chant short verses while patrolling. Not elaborate, just fragments to mark time and reassure citizens. A favorite. Sleep. Good soul / the horse hour ride / I guard the street. Simple and oddly comforting. You pass a woman pouring water over the steps of her inn, an old fire prevention ritual. She hears the night block and nods. Hours late, she mutters. Good to know he's out. That's the deeper truth. These men aren't just timekeepers. They're reminders that someone's always watching, always tending the edges of the dark. Here's your quirky detail. In one mountain village, night watchmen carried hollow gourds filled with pebbles. They shook them 3 times per hour, supposedly to mimic the sound of foxes and scare away real ones. Whether it worked is up for debate, but it certainly startled some hens. And speaking of animals, there's a superstition that if the hour is not marked properly, the kami, spirits, might roam too freely. So the samurai's rounds have an almost ritualistic quality. Timekeeping here is also spirit keeping. You pause in a small square, watching as the watchmen split paths. One walks toward the shrine, the other up toward the castle gate. Their rhythms are different, slightly staggered to ensure all districts hear the hour without overlap. The streets are nearly empty now. You hear distant splashes, maybe from a laundry basin still dripping. A final bell tolls from a hidden courtyard. But mostly, the soundscape belongs to the watchmen and their woodblocks. And then, just when you think it's done, you hear a single voice, low and melodic, carrying through the dark. The hour sleeps. But we do not by sword and step. The time is kept. You close your eyes for a moment, letting that line drift through you. This isn't just marking time. It's holding a city in its hands. By now the city is swaddled in night. The glow from lanterns softens every edge, blurs every shadow. The air is heavier, quieter, except for the distant knock of a night block, a soft murmur behind a closed shoji screen, and the one sound that has guided midnight for centuries, the sky itself. Because in this part of the night, you've entered the territory of moon gazers time that you're near the eastern quarter now, where the buildings lean more haphazardly and the streets feel a little less trimmed. There are rooftop gardens here, small ones, with moss and gravel and the occasional potted pine. And on those rooftops are people staring upward, waiting for the moon to do what clocks cannot. Your guide tonight is an old scholar named Harada. He's known as a Tsukimi Sensei, a moon-watching teacher. You find him seated on a low stool atop his modest house, scribbling into a ledger while squinting at the sky. He doesn't greet you with words, just a slow nod and an outstretched hand offering roasted chestnuts. You sit beside him in silence. The moon is high, soft-edged, and slightly yellow. Harada sighs. She's late, he murmurs. By at least 2 slivers. That's not poetic nonsense. In his world, a sliver refers to the width of moonlight passing between 2 roof beams at a specific angle. This is his timepiece. The interplay of shadow and silver light across familiar geometry that in medieval Japan, especially in scholarly or contemplative circles, the moon served not just as inspiration, but as a subtle kind of timekeeper. Before strict mechanical regulation, night was segmented by what you could see, and nothing offered more consistent beauty than the phases and positions of the moon. Harada shows you his chart. It's hand-drawn, delicate. Each month, he tracks the moon's rise relative to the north post of his gate. When it crosses the top, it's the hour of the pig. When it schemes the edge of the pine, it's nearly rat. His neighbors rely on him for midnight cues. Some even send rice balls and thanks. Historians still argue whether this was a widespread practice or an eccentric outlier. Certainly, not every town had a Harada on a roof. But written accounts suggest moon positions were used to cue temple rituals, drinking parties, and even laundry schedules. One diary entry from the Kamakura era notes, "Tonight, the moon kissed the well lip. Thus, time for rinsing robes." There's an odd serenity to this system. No alarms, no vibrations, no counting. Just observation and rhythm. You ask Harada how he adjusts for cloud cover. "I listen for frogs," he says, deadpan. Apparently, some Tsukimi followers cross-referenced frog chirps. When they paused twice, the moon's moved, he explains. You nod, understanding exactly none of it, but admiring the commitment. A few rooftops over, you notice another moon watcher. This one's younger, a poet maybe, whispering haiku to himself. His tea steam coils like incense. Harada grunts. New recruit. Counts moon spots instead of movement. Trendy. Here's a quirky fringe detail. One village, far to the south, supposedly trained cats to track moonlight through floorboards. When the light hit a certain point, the cats would leap toward it, expecting fish. The timing was so precise that the temple cook used it to start the rice. No one agrees if this was true, but the story has legs, mostly furry ones. Back to Harada. He's now adjusting a polished bronze plate. It reflects the moon in a curved oval, casting it onto a scroll. Just checking she hasn't gone shy, he mutters. You learn that some shrines even held moon rites to bless the passage of shadow. During these rites, priests would chant when the moonlight hit specific garden stones. For some, this was art. For others, sacred timekeeping. And of course, there are debates. Some scholars insist moon watching was mostly symbolic. Others argue that in a world without consistent urban lighting, lunar navigation was essential. A few go further, suggesting timekeepers trained under both sun and moon disciplines, keeping dueling journals to cross-check seasons as you rise to leave. Harada reaches for a bell, small, barely audible. He rings it once. Hour of the rat, he declares. The shadow past the iris. You look down, and sure enough, the long stem of his garden's lone iris now slices through the moonbeam on the tiles. Time has passed, but here, under the watchful face of the moon, it hasn't rushed. It's drifted, like clouds, like breath. The hour of the rat lingers as the sky deepens into a rich, inky indigo. Most of the city sleeps now, futons unfurled, braziers dimmed, dreams beginning their slow parade. But in one rarefied corner of this nocturnal world, a scroll is being unrolled, a lamp trimmed, a brush dipped. Because somewhere in the castle compound, someone is preparing to issue the shogun's daily edict, and with it, define the day's official time. You walk the path to the administrative quarter, feet brushing gravel that crunches like snow underfoot. There are guards here, silent, poised, statuesque, but they let you pass with a nod. Everyone here is on alert, but not hurried. They're used to waiting on the most powerful man in the realm to tell the country what time it is. That's not a joke. For centuries, especially during the height of the Tokugawa period, the shogun and his immediate advisors issued daily instructions for the running of the city and domain. Among these were not just political orders, but subtle cues: when to start the rice boiling, when to open the palace gates, when merchants could set up at the outer moat. These decisions formed the spine of civil timekeeping, especially for the elite. And at the heart of it all was the imperial calendar board, or rekidai. You reached the chamber just as a junior scribe lights the final lantern. A scroll lies ready on the lacquered desk, flanked by inkstones and ceremonial stamps. But before anything official is written, a small group gathers by the window, watching the sky. They don't speak. They don't check a sundial. They simply observe the light. Not the sun, but the pre-sun. The hint of light. The hue of the sky at the edge of night. One scholar murmurs. Dawn by the rule of ash pink. A poetic shorthand for a certain luminosity known to precede legitimate sunrise by just enough margin to declare official morning. Then the work begins. A court astronomer marks the day's sign in the zodiac. A time officer confirms the length of yesterday's 6th hour using incense record scrolls. A monk, borrowed from a nearby temple, writes a single verse to bless the decree. And finally, by brush, not voice, the shogun's edict is inscribed that today's includes first bell of Rice Gate to ring 1/4 later than crow's call. Tea ceremony at hour of dragon postponed to after incense clears. West Side city doors to open at bell echo, not strike. It's not about micromanagement. It's about ritual precision. These time notes are both symbolic and functional. They tie together the spiritual, the bureaucratic, and the deeply human desire to structure the day. Historians still argue how much of this was strictly followed. Some claim the outer towns paid no attention, relying instead on local monks and canal stewards. Others suggest that once the edict scrolls left the castle, they sparked a chain reaction: bells adjusted, drums recalibrated, even laundry lines delayed a few minutes. Here's your odd tidbit. The shogun's timekeeper once reportedly refused to issue an edict due to emotional fog. That's right. His personal mood was considered a weather event. The city started late that day. Several fish deliveries spoiled. A poem was composed in his honor. Even the sun sighs for him. You watch the scribes work. They don't rush. They breathe with the ink. One woman adjusts the edge of her scroll with a tiny deerbone tool. The official time marker is added in red, then sealed with a press of dried plum. And with that, the hour is declared. But wait, there's one more step. The edict couriers, already standing by in cloaks that shimmer faintly with rice wax oil, bow deeply and take up their scrolls. They don't run. They walk. And as they vanish into the corridors, a new wave of time begins. Back outside, you notice subtle changes. A small temple bell echoes differently now. A market tent begins to rise, though no one's buying anything yet. Somewhere, a fire is stoked with more purpose, and that's the beauty of it. The city is not obeying a clock. It's responding to language, to a verse that says, "Now, this is morning." And you? You were there when time was written into being, by brush, by light, by breath. It's barely past the hour of the hare, just after sunrise, and you're climbing a steep path lined with stones worn smooth by centuries of sandals. Birds call overhead, soft and deliberate, as if matching the pace of the town's waking. Ahead looms a thick-walled gatehouse, flanked by guards with halberds and polite expressions. You're entering one of the castle compounds, one with the gong tower. Because in the world of medieval Japanese timekeeping, nothing announces the hour with quite the same authority as the castle's gong. From your vantage, you see it. A tall wooden structure rising from the keep's second courtyard, roofed in copper and crowned with an open platform. Suspended beneath the roof is a massive bronze teisho, a ceremonial gong used not only for signaling time, but for asserting political presence. In some ways, it's less of a clock and more of a voice. The castle speaking to the town. A steward meets you at the base of the tower. His hands are stained with lacquer, and he smells faintly of pine tar. You're just in time, he says, with a smile that suggests the pun is deeply satisfying. You climb the interior stairs, narrow, creaky, spiraling, and emerge at the platform just as the gongkeeper prepares his tools. This is not just a bell with a stick. There's choreography, ritual. He dons gloves. He checks wind direction. He sprinkles a tiny pinch of sand beneath the gong to ground the sound. Then he lifts the striker, a long rod wrapped in felt, and begins the ritual striking of the morning hour. Gong, gong, pause. Gong. Each tone lingers in the air, hangs like a question before finally slipping away. The timing is deliberate. The pattern corresponds to an hour sequence known only within this castle's particular calendar. It's not the same as the temples. Not quite. Historians still debate whether castles intentionally desynchronized their gong rhythms to avoid confusion, or whether it was simply tradition piled atop tradition. Some documents suggest deliberate variation as a way of asserting jurisdiction. Our gong means our hour. You watch the sound move outward like a tide. Down in the lower town, people react, not immediately, but steadily. A cart rolls forward. A fishmonger lifts a curtain. A clerk turns over a woodblock sign that reads, "Counting begins." This last one is interesting. In this town, taxes and record-keeping were tied not to sunrise, but to the first gong. Until it struck, your debts didn't count, and it's not just civilians. Inside the castle, samurai pages adjust the pacing of their cleaning routines. Couriers waiting by the stables mount up. A cook stokes her fire with more urgency. Even the hawk trainer, you weren't expecting a hawk trainer, is seen opening a cage just after the final strike. Here's your quirky detail. One eccentric daimyo reportedly commissioned a singing gong, a chime that included embedded wind pipes, so each strike sounded like a low flute note. It was discontinued after complaints that it confused the rice birds. Back to our gongkeeper. He now wipes the striker carefully and bows toward the east. He tells you this act is both ritual and practical. Gong dust dulls the tone, he says, and the east greets us with time. You notice a companion bell nearby, a smaller one, copper, shaped more like a bellflower. It's used, he explains, for half-hour tones during busy mornings, but not on quiet days. The castle decides when the hour matters. That's the real lesson here. In medieval Japan, especially within castles, time was political. It reflected power, presence, and peace. To control the gong was to control the pulse of the entire domain, not by force, but by sound. And of course, debate still lingers in scholarly circles. Were these gongs calibrated against the sun or against the court calendar? Did they shift with the seasons? Or were they fixed like northern stars? The answer, likely, is a shrug followed by tea. You descend the tower slowly, ears still humming. The gong's resonance hasn't vanished. It's just tucked into the town's rhythm now, folded like silk into the fabric of everyone's expectations. And as you reach the gate again, you realize something strange. No one here seems to miss the ticking of a clock. The gong is enough. The castle is behind you now. It's gone the memory that still seems to vibrate faintly in your chest. The streets are warmer, fuller. Children hop along flagstones playing a game that appears to involve yelling at frogs. A tea vendor chuckles and waves. You wave back. You're headed for a quiet side street where the architecture shifts slightly. Less samurai grandeur, more monastic simplicity. You've arrived at the spiritual nerve center of time's vocabulary, the domain of temple-inspired temporal terms. In other words, this is where how people talked about time was shaped, not just when bells rang or water flowed, but in the very words they used to describe moments. You enter a small temple courtyard surrounded by low buildings and vine-wrapped pillars. At its heart is a modest hall, open to the breeze, where two monks sit with scrolls spread out before them. One is whispering syllables as he writes. The other, an older man with a smile like folded cloth, beckons you over. Come, he says. Sit with time. You oblige. What follows is not a lesson, not really. It's a quiet unveiling of how language, borrowed from Buddhism, poetry, astrology, and seasonal agriculture, filled in the spaces where numbers could not. In this world, no one says 8:30. They say Asiyuzu. Morning stillness after the rice has cooled. Not a fixed minute, more a feeling. Or they say Torio no Kaze. The wind of the carpenters, when workers begin sharpening tools in the shade before full heat arrives. One phrase catches your ear. The hour when ink begins to sleep. That's the time in early evening when the temperature dips just enough that ink no longer flows smoothly from the brush. It's used by scribes to determine when to stop copying texts. Historians still debate the origins of these phrases. Some argue they began in court poetry circles and were adopted downward. Others believe rural communities created them independently, and monks merely documented the most elegant ones. The truth? Probably both. Japan loves duality that fits in one bowl that you're handed a thin scroll, a lexicon of sorts. It includes terms like Nico no Jikin, cat time, the moment in mid-afternoon when cats begin stretching and seeking warmer sunspots. Used by laundry workers to shift drying lines. Kuchibu no Toki, the hour of whistling, when the breeze picks up enough to whistle through bamboo eaves. Often signals approaching dusk. Ashioto no Kage, footstep shadows, the time in late morning when shadows are directly beneath you. No poetic function, just extremely useful. Here's a wonderful fringe tidbit. Some temples kept word clocks, where novice monks wrote a new term for each passing half hour onto a hanging scroll. Instead of chimes, the head monk would read aloud the word. If it was gong of plum steam, you knew it was roughly 10 a.m. and time for kitchen prayers. The monks show you a current scroll, Kurogi no Kane, the bell of the cricket. It means the sun has tipped westward just enough to cast a shadow from the temple's cornerstone onto the gravel path where the crickets begin their day chirp. That a farmer might say, I left just after the bell of the cricket. No one would ask what that meant. Everyone would know. You sip tea and listen as the older monk recites a few more. Each term paints a moment, not just its time, but its mood. That's the power here. Time is not dissected. It is experienced and named, like a friend passing through the gate. You learn that merchants also adopted these terms. Contracts might read, delivery to be made by the second crow's shrug. Postal riders would time their departure by dusk when dogs begin to circle. In fact, Time phrases became so layered that a separate class of interpreters, called Tokyoways no Mono, or time matchers, helped mediate between temples, towns, and tax officials. Their job? Translate poetic time into bureaucratic schedule. It paid poorly, but came with great rice. And yes, there's scholarly debate about all this. Some call it charming inefficiency. Others see it as the ultimate marriage of culture and function. A few dismiss it as nostalgic nonsense. But you, having sat here with warm tea and a scroll full of ink-sleeping hours, know better day as you rise to go. The younger monk hands you a slip of parchment. On it is written, Yukari no Jikin, the hour of gentle connection. You look around. The shadows have shifted. The crickets are singing. And yes, time has passed. You leave the temple courtyard with your slip of parchment tucked neatly into your robe. The hour of gentle connection. It read, and somehow, as you walk down the winding lane toward a bustling residential quarter, you feel it lingering in the air. The world is quieter now, not because it's empty, but because everything seems to be leaning slightly toward tea. And indeed, in this section of the city, time itself is calibrated not by bells or blocks, but by steaming cups and careful sips. You've arrived at the realm of noon tea customs. The lane leads you to a small tea house nestled between two pines, their branches trained downward like polite conversation. A hand-lettered sign swings gently. Yugen no cha, subtleties tea. You duck inside. Inside, the space is cool and dim. Tatami mats underfoot. A single scroll on the wall reads, Water should never know its own heat. You suspect it's a metaphor, or maybe just a warning against overboiling. The host bows deeply. The noon steep approaches, he says, offering you a place near the kettle. Around the room, a small gathering of regulars settles in, each arriving with impeccable timing. There are no watches. No one checks the sun. And yet they are all here, exactly when the tea hour begins. This custom, rooted in both Zen and merchant culture, is known as shokudoki, the hour of first tea. It's not fixed, but floats loosely around what we would call 11:30 a.m. to 1 p.m., depending on the season. The idea is simple. When the morning labor winds down and the heat hasn't yet turned aggressive, it is time to pause, not to rest entirely, but to recalibrate. Tea is the clock, the host, a man with impossibly smooth sleeves and a voice like folded silk, prepares the kettle. The water doesn't boil. It listens. You're offered a sweet, a wagashi filled with chestnut paste, and then the first cup is poured. One sip in, and you feel it, the rhythm shift. You are no longer in motion. Time slows around you like ink on damp paper. Historians still argue whether these noon tea practices stemmed from aristocratic Zen culture or from merchant necessity. In port cities like Osaka, the tea hour often corresponded with tide tables, ensuring trade goods could be moved just after. In inland towns, it followed the drying of rice cakes, ensuring stomachs were empty enough to appreciate bitterness. Here's a wonderful fringe detail. In one rice trading town, the tea hour was marked by the release of a tea goose, a trained bird that would waddle through the merchant quarter with a tiny bell on its neck. It stopped only for its handler's teacup, signaling that the first steep had begun. If the goose refused to walk, which it often did, the tea hour was officially delayed by whim. Your host passes around a kuchikami machi, a mouth-mashed rice sweet said to prepare the tongue for sincerity. You're not sure it does that, but it's delicious. Conversations are hushed, abstract. One man mentions a poem about leaves falling. Another discusses a faint ache in his right heel that always signals humidity. No one discusses clocks. No one needs to. Instead, time is measured by the length of steam rising from the kettle, longer in dry weather. The rhythm of sips, 5 before the host refills. The sweet's dissolving rate, different every month. There's a moment in every tea hour where the conversation simply stops. Not awkwardly. Naturally. The host dims the lantern just slightly. This moment, called ma no toki, the time between, lasts perhaps a breath, perhaps 3. It signals the turn from first cup to second, and it's said that only a fool speaks during it. You stay quiet. And here's the scholarly debate. Was this just leisure for the privileged, or did it shape actual urban planning? Some suggest city schedules, gate openings, garden watering, incense refill rounds were all timed around tea. One theory posits that a popular tea house in Kyoto subtly shifted the city's rhythm for decades, simply by steeping earlier. Back in the room, the second cup arrives. It is warmer, greener, a little more forward. A woman across from you smiles faintly and says, "Ah, hour of the second echo." You know, without asking, that this means time is beginning to stretch again. The lull is ending. Action returns. And indeed, one by one, people rise. There are no goodbyes, just soft bows. The host sprinkles a few drops of water onto the hearth. The hiss is the hour's final punctuation mark. You step outside. The street is brighter now. Laundry flaps on lines. Vendors shout faintly in the distance. And yet, thanks to the tea, time feels like it is moving with you, not around you. That's the gift of shokudoki. Not just tea, not just noon, but knowing, really knowing, when you've arrived at the center of your own day. You're drifting now, not walking. The tea still lingers in your bloodstream, soft, warm, a little leafy, and the street feels as if it's swaying ever so slightly beneath your feet. But the city isn't napping. It's slipping quietly into its next phase, and with it comes the night watch drums. Unlike the ceremonial castle gong or the melodic rhythms of the bell traders, these drums are utilitarian, blunt, and as dependable as your own heartbeat. They're not here to charm. They're here to warn that darkness is total, that wandering too long could invite trouble, that sleep is both advised and expected. You follow the sound, a low, deliberate dawn and dawn, echoing across tiled rooftops and fish-scented alleys. 3 beats. A pause. 3 again. This rhythm means the hour of the boar, roughly 9 to 11 p.m., has begun. Time to get home. Time to bar the shutters. Time to let the city sleep. You reach a neighborhood filled with row houses, each front lined with potted vegetables, wind chimes, or shoeboards polished by generations of sandals. A low wooden tower stands at the far end, barely taller than a 2-story house, topped with a small canopy and a yagura daiko, a thick-bodied drum mounted horizontally. At its base sits a drummer, cross-legged, surrounded by ceramic jugs and a pot of roasted chestnuts. He's old, possibly ancient. You'd believe either. His hands move not with force, but with memory, striking the drum in a way that feels more like breathing than percussion. You ask him how long he's been keeping the hour. Since the frogs sang louder than the monks, he says, eyes twinkling. In medieval Japan, cities, especially those with castle towns or major ports, employed drum towers to mark nighttime hours after bell towers went silent. Drums carried further in dense air, they said, and they were harder to mistake for anything else. Historians still argue whether these watch drums were synchronized across towns or operated as independent clocks. Some records point to drum orders issued by the shogun, templates for which rhythms to use on which days. Others suggest local drumkeepers, like this man, developed their own codes based on weather, festivals, or neighborhood habits. That here's your quirky detail. In one coastal town, the night drumbeat included a pause in which the drummer would loudly slurp noodles. That sound, believe it or not, became the official mark of the end of the hour of the dog. Residents claimed it was more reliable than a clock. When Saburo slurps, they'd say, the fish sleep too. Your current drumkeeper doesn't slurp, but he does hum. After the third beat of each round, he murmurs something. Maybe a lullaby, maybe a prayer. You ask him once, and he says, it's for the foxes. They count time too. You're not sure if he's joking. You sit beside him for a while, watching the neighborhood dim. One by one, doors are bolted. A mother whispers a story to her child, audible through a paper screen. A dog yawns, circles, settles. The drum continues. 3 beats, then quiet. Then again. You learn that each beat not only marks time, it signals which district is watching. This hour, it's the river quarter. The next, temple side. If a beat is late or absent, others take note. Letters are sent. Apologies, occasionally with rice crackers, are delivered. The drumkeeper shows you a drum scroll, a rolled length of silk marked with faint red lines and finger-worn kanji. Each line notes the seasonal shift. In winter, beats are closer together. In summer, more spaced. Because sleep comes easier in warmth, he explains. And here's where debate comes in. Some scholars claim these rhythms were deeply mathematical, rooted in Buddhist calendars and sun-moon ratios. Others say they were entirely improvised, depending more on intuition than calculation. The truth, as usual, probably hums somewhere in between. The drummer hands you a wooden mallet. Gently, you strike the drum once. The sound rolls out like a soft thunder. A few windows flicker with lamplight. A baby stirs. Somewhere, a door locks. You hand the mallet back with a bow. Good, he says. You've marked the next hour. Sleep will know it. You rise and walk away, the rhythm echoing behind you. The city is folding inward now. Only the watchmen, the cats, and a few fireflies remain. And the drum, of course. Always the drum. You wander down from the drum tower, each step softer than the last, as if even the ground beneath you is trying not to wake anyone. The town has entered its nighttime hush. But up ahead, flickering faintly in the gloom, you spot a curious sight, a line of bobbing lights on the water. Not lanterns on boats. These are floating beacon fires, the soft, spectral kind that drift downstream not for travel, but to tell the time that you've arrived at the riverside quarter where the flow itself is time, and fire its messenger that a narrow path leads you past moored fishing skiffs and small homes built on stilts. The air is thick with cedar smoke, river mist, and the slightly sour perfume of pickled daikon. You hear murmurs, quiet, careful. The town here doesn't use drums or bells. They use flames, set afloat in small leaf boats, each one marking the passage of another hour into night. You reach the edge of the dock just as a man in a patched robe kneels beside a bamboo basket. Inside are dozens of paper cups, each filled with oil, a tiny wick, and a dry magnolia leaf folded into a boat. He lights one, whispers something to it, perhaps a prayer or just a weather report, and places it in the water. It drifts slowly westward, joining a dozen others. That was the midnight mark, he says. The third hour of the bore. In this riverside district, they release a new beacon every half hour. adjusting based on how long it takes the last one to disappear beyond a bend in the river. You ask how they track cloudy nights or choppy current. He shrugs. If it's windy, we wait. If it rains, we light them twice. But if the river's too angry, we all sleep early. There's a serenity to this system. It's communal but quiet. No one shouts the time. No one even says it aloud. You see it, floating away from you. Historians still argue over whether floating beacons like these were ritual, poetic, or practical. Some records link them to Buddhist ceremonies for the dead, lanterns for guiding spirits to the next world. Others insist they were part of harbor schedules, a way for fishermen and warehouse keepers to time late-night deliveries. Here's your quirky tidbit. In one legendary tale, a boatman named Kameo was so precise in launching beacons that he could tell the exact hour just by how long it took a flame to pass a certain willow branch. When the shogun's inspector came to audit timekeeping, Kameo beat the palace's own bell by 30 heartbeats. He was awarded a new oar and a silk hat. The hat later became a family heirloom and a clock of its own. It was only worn after the third beacon. You sit at the edge of the dock and watch the next flame drift out. Children are asleep. Traders are long done for the day. But one figure sits a few docks over, eyes trained on the river's black mirror. He's a tea courier, and the beacon fire tells him when it's time to begin his journey to the mountain villages. He can't leave before the fifth flame. That's the rule. You ask why? He shrugs. They say foxes walk at fourth fire. There's something in the ritual that feels sacred. Not superstitious, just meaningful. Like the river itself holds a clock you have to float to read. Some houses here have glass beacons, old sake bottles fitted with wicks and tiny slats to protect the flame. Others use gourds, hollowed and sealed with wax. One wealthy widow even uses floating ceramic cranes, delicate and fireproof, that glide almost stubbornly in the current. The man beside you leans in. Want to light the fifth? You nod. He passes you a wick boat, already trembling from the tiny breeze. You touch fire to thread. The light flares, steadies, begins its journey. You set it gently into the water, where it bobs, then glides with dignity toward the black bend in the river. Hour of the ox, he murmurs, and that's all that needs to be said. The river fades behind you, its floating flames winking out one by one. The city is fully asleep now, save for the occasional thump of a night block or the whispery laughter of wind in reed walls. But in one of the outlying villages, where the city melts into farmland, there's still motion, a rustle in the fields, a clang of metal, and the gentle clatter of wooden sandals. It's not a ghost or a thief. It's something much more routine, yet surprisingly precise. You've arrived in the realm of seasonal festival clocks, not clocks in the ticking sense. No gears, no escapements. But make no mistake, these festivals measure time with remarkable reliability. And they do it by manipulating routine. Tonight, the village is lit not by gongs or bells, but by hanging festival lanterns shaped like melons and gourds, each hand-painted with symbols for specific months. A man named Terezo, who smells faintly of sake and grilled eel, waves you toward his central square. You're just in time, he says. They're about to release the dragon. You're not sure what that means. You follow anyway. Seasonal festivals in medieval Japan were more than celebrations. They were temporal anchors. The year was divided by both the lunar calendar and an agricultural logic, each season punctuated by carefully timed rituals that everyone remembered. You didn't ask someone the date. You asked, is this before the gourd race or after the firefish parade? Terezo points to a platform where villagers are unrolling a long paper dragon, painted in blue and silver, its scales glinting in the lamplight. As it stretches over the square, it starts to move, not with motors or pulleys, but with people. 20 of them, children and elders alike, carry the dragon's frame through the village, their rhythm coordinated by a slow, steady drumbeat. Each beat, each step, is time. Historians still argue whether these processions were originally synchronized with religious calendars or developed locally around harvest cycles. Either way, they served as community time signatures, embedding memory into movement. You walk beside the dragon parade as it curls around the rice paddies. A woman explains that when the tail reaches the far tree stump, it's officially the hour of reversal, the midway point between planting and reaping. No one needs a chart. They just watch for the turn. Here's your quirky fact. In some mountain villages, each season had a walking song with a specific tempo. Spring songs were quick. Winter ones slow, with long notes held for breath. These songs weren't just festive, they were timing mechanisms. Travelers paced their hikes, merchants their deliveries, even weavers their looms. Based on these melodies, back in the square, another ritual begins. This one involves seasonal shadow readings. A priest holds a lantern at a fixed angle while a child stands in a marked circle. The child's shadow must touch a specific line etched into the dirt. Only then can the next part of the festival begin. If the shadow is too short, they wait. If too long, they hurry. Everyone watches. It's a communal clock made of light and child height. Terezo grins. That's how we know when to release the rice spirits. And sure enough, a group of elders in matching robes step forward with shallow baskets full of tiny rice husks. They toss them into the wind. The pattern the husks form, how they spiral, how fast they fall, tells the community elder if the season is early or late. You ask how accurate it is. He shrugs. More accurate than your shoes. The parade winds down. The dragon is folded gently, reverently. A slow-burning incense coil is lit, a festival hourglass, designed to burn for exactly one seasonal hour. No one stares at it. They just know. When the scent changes, the day is done. You sit on a low bench carved with turtle designs. Children nap in laps. The last drumbeat fades, and you realize something. This wasn't just celebration. It was scheduling. Festivals here didn't follow time, they created it. You didn't wake because the sun rose. You woke because it was time to catch the turn of the lantern. You didn't sleep because it was late. You slept because the shadow line was touched, the rice husks spiraled inward, and the song slowed. The seasons told stories, and the stories kept time. The scent of smoke and sweet rice lingers on your clothes as you leave the village square behind. The night feels older now, more serious. Even the frogs have stopped their bragging. But as you round a bend near the edge of town, another rhythm picks up. Not one of drums or bells, but the creak of oars and the slap of wet rope. You're at the river again, but this isn't a ceremony. It's work. You've entered the territory of fishing boat timers, where the flow of water, the shimmer of stars, and the breath of tides keep fishermen tethered to time. It begins with a whistle. Soft, sharp, two tones. You hear it before you see the source. A man standing at the bow of a narrow wooden boat, lantern tied to a long bamboo pole, his hair braided back in the coastal style. He raises a hand and whistles again. This is the launch signal, an unofficial, community-understood cue that the first boats may leave in this particular fishing hamlet. The night fleet departs based not on the hour struck from a gong or the rhythm of a bell trader, but on the tide's language, interpreted and announced by the lead whistle man. The other boats respond like birds from a wire. One by one, they push off, sliding into the current with practiced grace. Each has a lantern at the prow and a specific whistle sequence to signal its distance, speed, and phase of fishing. You watch as the river glows faintly with drifting lights, like stars dropped onto moving ink. Historians still debate the origins of this timing method. Some say it began with river eel fishers in the Heian era, using reed flutes to avoid scaring the catch. Others argue it's older, a holdover from oceanic Ainu traditions, where song and tide were always paired. Either way, the timing here is astonishingly precise. Boats depart in waves, each 5 minutes apart, to avoid crowding the prime pools. The lead boat times its launch using a tide pole, carved with notches and painted with shell paste. When the water reaches the third line, the eel beds are calm. That's the signal. You meet a wiry man in a patched robe, clearly proud of his boat, which he refers to as the Quiet Lantern. He shows you his fishing clock, a strip of bark marked with fish silhouettes. This notch, he says, pointing, is when the river smells like moss. Then it's time for crab traps. Yes, smell. These fishers are trained to read time by scent that he explains. Each phase of the tide releases different algae compounds. The moss smell marks the turn. The salt fade means incoming tide. The sulfur lick? Too late. Go home. Here's your quirky tidbit. In one port town, the harbor master kept a snail on a paddle. When the tide was right for night fishing, the snail would move to the paddle's tip, seeking damp. He was called Old Master Shoji, and his accuracy rate reportedly beat that of imported Dutch watches. Back on shore, women wait with clay whistle jars, small pots filled with holes that change tone with wind. When the third wave of boats leaves, the jars are tapped gently with wooden sticks. The resulting hums travel down the riverbank. This tells the return crews when to prepare nets for retrieval. Even children help keep time. They light bundles of twigs tied in spirals. Each burns for 15 minutes, and they're placed near the fire pits where the morning stew will be warmed. The number of burned spirals on return tells the cook exactly how long the crew was gone. You ask if anyone ever loses track of time. One woman laughs. We don't. The river reminds us. Indeed, the river is the only real clock here. It moves at its own pace, but the fishers have learned its ticks and pulses. They don't conquer the current, they mirror it, and then you hear it again, a whistle, this time a triple tone, a return signal. One boat glides back in, its catch visible even in dim light. Small fish glinting like knife blades in a wet basket. The cook nods. The children count spirals. A man claps once, sharply. The hour has turned. You sit on the dock, feeling the damp boards beneath you. The lanterns sway. The tide breathes. Time, here, is not tracked. It's lived. You wake to the sound of something familiar now. A gentle ding, ding ding. But this time it's not a bell trader or a fisherman's whistle. It's the chime of a field bell, rung by a young girl standing at the edge of a rice paddy. She swings a wooden striker against a bronze bell tied to a pole set deep into the damp soil. The sound echoes across the terraced hills like a sleepy song. Welcome to the rice field task bells, where time is planted, tended, and harvested just like the crop itself. This isn't ceremonial. It's calendar work in motion. The girl's bell means start of planting row 3, not row 4, not harvesting, just row 3. This bell is one of many spread across the paddies, each one tuned slightly differently. The higher-pitched ones mark planting stages. The low, throaty ones call for water breaks or signal incoming carts of seedlings. You walk a narrow dike path between fields, careful not to disturb the growing stalks. To your right, a pair of old men adjust a wooden lever system that controls irrigation flow. They nod politely, but keep working. To your left, a woman with calves thick as tree stumps kneels in the muck, moving with mechanical precision. Her rhythm matches the bells. Historians still debate whether these bells originated with Buddhist agrarian orders or were simply practical responses to labor coordination. But there's no doubt they evolved into a full temporal system, specific to each valley or plain. A farmer explains it to you. Our bells aren't ours. They're tasks. A full day's rhythm. Dig, seed, press, water, rest, repeat. He shows you his task scroll, a faded cloth with painted bells and accompanying glyphs. Some are shaped like rice grains, others like feet. The glyph for rest is a wide circle with a wavy line through it. That one's everyone's favorite, he says, grinning. Here's your delightful detail. In some regions, scarecrows wore little clay bells that would jingle when the wind blew. This wasn't just to frighten crows. It reminded workers of the wind's direction and time to check the top patties for runoff. One village had a singing crowman, Scarecrow, who rang reliably during midday gusts. The villagers called him Mayor of Break Time. Further along, you pass a bellkeeper's hut, a simple wooden shelter filled with spare bells, polishing tools, and a small brazier for boiling the striker quartz. The keeper, a sturdy woman with a deep voice and no-nonsense manner, explains that each bell has to be cleaned weekly. Rust dulls time, she says. She invites you to strike one of the low-pitched break bells. You do, and the tone vibrates up your arm like slow thunder. Across the field, heads lift. Some workers laugh. A man lifts a gourd and shouts, "Too early. We're still on the 5th. Oops, but it's forgiven." Because even missteps are part of the rhythm. The bellkeeper shows you a seasonal tuning rack, a wooden board with small notches where bells are hung, depending on the humidity. In spring, metal shrinks, she explains. In summer, we loosen the cords. You can't rush a rice bell. It gets offended. And the children? They learn time by mimic bells, small gongs they strike at home during play. Some schools teach rhythm classes using patties as their outdoor classroom. One boy you meet taps out a harvest hour sequence on a turtle shell with 2 sticks. His grandmother nods in approval. You ask if anyone ever gets annoyed by the constant chiming. Only the frogs, someone says. And they don't vote. Scholars remain split on whether this system was deeply embedded in national rice policy or simply a charming form of collective labor coordination. But everyone agrees, it worked. In towns that used rice field bells, productivity was higher. Seasonal targets were met more consistently. And more importantly, people felt part of a living rhythm, not just a deadline. You take a turn ringing the end-of-day bell, a dull, weighty sound that seems to hug the air around it. In the distance, workers stretch their backs. Someone pours water into a stone basin. The irrigation gate clicks shut that it's not just the end of a shift. It's the closing of time. The bell has said so. And as you head back down the narrow path, the stalks whisper against each other in the breeze, the way rice always does when it's heard the bell. The sun is fading fast, dipping behind the hills in a slow curtain call of golden streaks. As the last light slides off the rooftops and leaves everything in a soft gray hush, you hear something you haven't heard before, a high, breathy whistle, faint as wind through reeds. You follow it, curious, and find yourself at the edge of the forest district where artisans live. There, suspended on poles and dangling from trees, are slender flutes of polished bamboo. You've stumbled into one of the most delicate timekeeping systems of all, reed pipe wind clocks. You wouldn't even notice them at first. They hang like ornaments, disguised as simple wind chimes. But these aren't for decoration. They're calibrated wind instruments, each one carved to produce a specific pitch when the wind reaches a certain speed. That pitch tells you the hour, not precisely, but poetically, predictably. You meet an old flute maker named Naki who sits cross-legged by a brazier, sipping tea from a cracked cup. They start at dusk, he says, gesturing toward a pipe hung beneath his eaves. High tone means early. Low tone means you've missed dinner. He points out 4 pipes hanging nearby. One tuned to the hour of the monkey, a bright whistle for early evening. One for the hour of the boar, a mournful note that floats low over rooftops. One called the house pipe, tuned not to time, but to announce the return of the local tofu vendor. And the last? It hasn't sounded in weeks. That one's for full moons only, Naki says, smiling. Historians still debate how widespread reed wind clocks were. Some treat them as regional quirks, Kyoto artisans being, well, Kyoto artisans. Others believe they were once common in forest hamlets and mountainside tea villages, especially where other time signals, bells, drums, couldn't reach. You listen as a gust of wind rustles through the alley. A pipe somewhere sings, a soft, sustained C-sharp. Naki closes his eyes. Hour of the dog, he murmurs. Just in time. He hands you a tiny scroll with a drawn diagram, a time wheel of sorts, marked by pipe tones instead of hours. Some symbols resemble birds. Others look like blowing leaves. Each pitch represents a time and a mood. Whisper, hum, flutter, cry. You realize now that in this district, time is not rung or counted. It's inhaled. When the wind calls, people react. Not mechanically, but organically. A woman a few doors down opens her shutters the moment the dogpipe sings. She pulls clothes off a line, shakes out a blanket, begins folding. A boy lights a lantern inside a lacquer shop. The dog next door barks once and curls up. His cue to end the day. And here's your quirky detail. One local legend claims a village once trained its windpipes to sing a lullaby when 3 specific tones aligned in winter. Elders say this meant all work must stop and cocoa rice be served. Whether the lullaby was ever real is unclear, but the cocoa ritual still persists that you're invited to try a pipe yourself. Naki gives you one to blow into, a shorter reed that mimics the hour of candle lighting. You take a deep breath, exhale carefully, and the note that emerges is soft and oddly sad. Perfect, he says. That's a bedtime note. He tells you that when children are born, families sometimes carve a pipe that matches their birth wind, a symbolic hour marker for their lives. When that child grows old enough, they're taught how to listen for their hour, the wind that calls them home. You ask what happens when it doesn't blow. Then, Naki says, you make tea. Time comes later. As the wind picks up again, a new round of tones drifts through the alley. Some faint, some firm. One particularly sharp whistle makes a group of neighbors laugh. That's the tofu hour again, someone shouts. And all around you, the notes blend into twilight. No ticking, no countdown. Just reeds and wind and human ears trained to listen. You walk away slower now, letting the tones guide your steps, wondering what your hour might sound like if carved into bamboo. You follow the winding road away from the reed pipe district, your ears still echoing with its thin music. It's almost fully dark now, save for a few flickering lanterns and the faint glow from windows, where someone's likely still nibbling rice crackers or arguing gently about plum trees. And yet, far off in the direction of the palace compound, another sound is beginning to rise, a low, graceful thrum, not unlike the beginning of a lullaby. Tonight, you're about to experience time as court music time songs, where hours aren't marked, but sung into being. You find your way to a small hall near the city's cultural quarter, a long, narrow structure ringed with plum trees and echo tiles, the kind that resonate even with footsteps. Inside, sitting on woven mats arranged in crescent shapes, are a dozen or so court musicians dressed in soft layers of silk, sleeves as long as your forearms. They aren't performing for an audience. They're performing for the hour. The instrument at the heart of it all is the show, a bamboo mouth organ, shaped like a cluster of reeds rising from a porcelain base. It produces chords that sound like clouds moving across a pond. Alongside it, the koto, strummed like a harp laid flat, the biwa, sharp and percussive, and the hichariki, a double reed woodwind that cuts straight through the quiet like a line of ink. As the music begins, no one speaks. This is the hour of the rat, midnight to 2 a.m., and the Tsukiyomi Yuta, or moon measuring song, has begun to Heian-era court culture and its long echoes through medieval Japan. Time was often signaled not by physical markers alone, but by music. Specific melodies were paired with specific hours, not just to indicate time, but to shape it. A gentle tune could settle nerves. A stern one might call for attention. The most famous were moon songs, wind dances, and incense harmonics. Historians still argue whether these were played on a strict schedule or used flexibly. Some say elite households kept hour scrolls listing which piece to play when. Others believe it was more intuitive. The head musician simply felt the hour and chose the mood accordingly. Tonight's piece is slow, almost hovering. The show holds a constant drone as the koto plucks out a rhythm that feels like breath. Inhale, exhale, pause. It isn't loud. You don't listen with your ears. You listen with your skin. The air thickens with melody. The court steward leans toward you. This hour's piece reminds us not to force sleep, he whispers, only to invite it. There's a chart beside him, a silk scroll painted with hour glyphs and corresponding song names. White snow preludes for the hour of the tiger. Ash petals at hour of the snake. Candle feather melody at hour of the dog. Each song title is metaphorical, evocative of seasonal imagery, whether moods or dream states. You notice no mention of numbers. The court doesn't care for digits. Here's your charming tidbit. One empress was so fond of the hour of the ox piece, Night River Willow, that she commissioned a variant called Willow Repeats, to be played whenever she couldn't sleep. Over time, it became a signal for the palace kitchen to begin late-night soup. You ask if these songs ever changed over the centuries. A musician nods. When new dreams were invented, he says, what about accuracy? Some scholars insist that despite the poetic veneer, these songs were linked to precise incense clocks, sticks of aromatic wood that burned at a rate matching each tune's length. If the stick ended too soon or too late, the song was adjusted. A kind of analog auto-tuning. The musicians pause now. They exchange glances. The next hour is approaching. Without fanfare, they shift key. The biwa sharpens its tone. The hichariki breathes deeper. The music grows darker, but not ominous, like a shadow that understands it's being watched. And in the palace kitchens, you hear the quiet clatter of bowls. Somewhere, a brushstroke is paused on a half-written letter. A page glides past the doorway, all of them responding, not to a bell, not to a drum, but to a chord. The hour has changed. You didn't need to be told. You sit a while longer, watching as the song fades back into silence like an ink line trailing off the edge of parchment. The music fades, but the silence it leaves behind feels charged, like the hush after snowfall. You step out of the court music hall and into the deeper folds of night, past shuttered shops and incense-dark doorways. You think you've seen it all by now, bells, drums, wind, water, flame. But one more method remains, hidden behind thick cedar gates and stone garden walls. You're entering the contemplative world of monastic timekeepers, where time is not just tracked, but devoted. You pass through the outer grounds of a Zen monastery, just as the moon casts its clean light over raked gravel and crooked pines. There are no posted hours here, no clocks, no gongs sounding above the gate. Instead, time is kept by rhythm, of breath, of task, of mindfulness that you're greeted by a young monk with close-cropped hair and bare feet. He nods once and gestures for you to follow. No words, just footsteps over sanded wood. He leads you to a small hall filled with woven mats and the warm glow of a single oil lamp. A few monks sit in silence, back straight, eyes neither open nor closed. Zazen meditation in its purest form. You join, quietly. And without knowing how long, you begin to understand that here, time isn't announced. It is practiced. In Zen monasteries, especially those of the medieval period, monks kept time through routine. but not the kind built on clocks. Their lives were arranged into precise blocks of physical, mental, and spiritual labor, not by exact hours, but by presence. You do a thing until it is fully done. You move when movement arises. You end when the bell within you rings. Still, there are time signals, small ones. You hear it now, a low, single stroke of a kisu, a suspended bronze bowl used in Zen halls. It's not hit. It's coaxed, struck so softly that it hums rather than rings. This is the cue for the third sitting of the night. Somewhere, another monk rises and begins sweeping a walkway. You realize you've been sitting for perhaps 30 minutes, or maybe 2 hours. Historians still argue how monastic timekeeping balanced with outside civil rhythms. Some claim monasteries ignored civil time entirely, while others suggest they maintained parallel clocks, ritual time inside, bellandrum outside. One scroll even shows a diagram of incense sticks labeled both temple hour and town hour, as if trying to teach a child 2 languages that a senior monk enters now. He carries a makujio, a wooden drum shaped like a fish. He strikes it once, then chants a single phrase about impermanence. The rhythm, not the words, signals a shift that in this monastery. Daily time is marked by 8 major events. Morning bell, not a bell at all, but 3 claps. First meal, indicated by the scent of pickled radish placed on a windowsill. Garden raking begins when shadows reach the second stepping stone. Sutra reading, triggered by the chirp of the pond frogs. No joke, walking meditation, starts when the lantern wick is trimmed. Evening water, drawn after the 3rd pot crack. Final meal, signaled by the rice grain chant. Midnight silence, when the incense ends but no replacement is lit. Each is a timepiece. Each is a way to move through the day without naming it. Here's your peculiar detail. One Zen master reportedly refused to accept any student who asked, "What time is it?" He said, "If you can ask, you are not yet inside the hour." His monastery kept no timepieces at all, only a roster of doers, each one tasked with a job whose completion marked the next beginning. In effect, a human chain of causality. You watch a monk refill the lamp with oil. Another folds a robe with such care you wonder if he's sculpting, not dressing. There's a rhythm here, yes, but it flows inward, not out that you're invited to join a silent tea. No signals, no glances, just a warm bowl placed before you at the right moment. And when it's empty, no refill. The time for tea is over because it passed, not with bells, but with understanding. And so, as you step back into the quiet night, the monastery behind you hums not with chimes or chants, but with people moving like clockwork. Without clocks, you think to yourself, this is the only place where time is lived through, not lived by. You emerge from the monastery grounds just as the sky begins to hint at something beyond night. Not sunrise, not yet, but a subtle paling, like someone breathing lightly onto a scroll to dry the ink. The town is still asleep, the streets empty save for a cat preening itself beside a shuttered tofu stall. But you know you're nearing the end of your journey, because the next sound you hear is not sacred, not poetic, and not even especially musical. It's the slow, deliberate thok of something being chopped that you're in the noble quarter now. Though it smells less like elegance and more like pickled plums and cedar oil. You're here to observe a final comparison in your journey. Commoner versus elite timing at first glance. Time should be the same for everyone. The sun rises, the tide flows, the rice must be cooked. But in medieval Japan, time was social. Where you sat in society, what you wore, where you lived, who bowed to you. also shaped how, and even when, you measured the day that you're invited into a mid-ranking samurai household, a long rectangular building with a courtyard filled with sand patterns and a solitary pine. Inside, servants are already at work, one trimming candle wicks, another polishing the metal incense clock, a third watching the shadow of the threshold with an intensity usually reserved for foxes. The lady of the house appears, hair coiled like waves in winter, and gestures for you to join her on the veranda. "The plum bell has not sounded yet," she says softly. "But we are awake. Status waits for no strike. That's how elite timekeeping works. It's anticipatory. The upper class doesn't react to bells, they prepare before them. Servants coordinate duties not by hearing a gong, but by interpreting pre-signals, the angle of shadows, the temperature of tea, the scent of temple incense floating through upper air. Meanwhile, commoners, merchants, vendors, field workers function more respondently. They wait for a bell, a drum, a whistle, a boat to drift by. They measure time with their ears and noses, while nobles often use sight and symbolism. The samurai house uses partition candles, tall sticks of wax etched with gold ink. Each hour burns down exactly one crest mark. A boy is responsible for checking them every 20 minutes. If he misses a mark, he must bow to the family armor stand for 15 minutes. It's not punishment, it's recalibration. And yet, as you're led through the kitchen to the servants' wing, you see something unexpected, a chart of town bells nailed beside the door. The staff relies on them, not the gold candles, to sync the household's outer duties. A kind of hybrid timekeeping, where civil rhythm and elite symbolism coexist. Historians note this divide with fascination. Was it intentional? Did the elite want to exist above common time? Or was it simply inertia, the rhythm of wealth echoing its own priorities? Here's your quirky fact. One nobleman insisted his servants only start meals when the plum tree's shadow reached the koi pond. Unfortunately, a neighboring house added a second plum tree to its garden, causing confusion and a minor diplomatic incident. The matter was resolved when both families agreed to cut exactly one branch each. Outside now, the commoners are stirring. The fishmonger yawns. A woman balances a stack of buckets. A little boy ties bells to a bamboo stick and begins practicing his merchant cry. Their world starts with sound. The noble quarter's world starts before it. And yet, both rely on each other. The noble house receives fresh miso only after the city bell strikes the hour of the hare. The merchant eats breakfast when the elite's discarded rice appears at the shrine gate. The timing intertwines, not equal, but essential. And as the first temple bell of the day rings faintly from the hills, both worlds shift in tandem. The rice is stirred. The armor is dusted. The city wakes as one, in its beautifully layered choreography of class and cadence. The final stretch of your journey begins not with a bell or a drum or the scent of incense, but with stillness. The city has begun to yawn and stretch. The light creeping over rooftops is no longer silver, but milk-white, tinged with warmth. Somewhere, someone is unrolling a mat. Somewhere else, a pair of sandals is slipped quietly onto feet. But here, in this modest workshop at the edge of the merchant quarter, you stand among wood shavings, tools, and a gentle, expectant silence. You've reached the cusp of modernity, and with it, the quiet end of a 1,000-year dance. This is where Japan begins to prepare for mechanical clocks. The workshop's master is a man named Umezawa. Thin, sharp-eyed, always sniffing as if expecting time to change scent. Around him are scattered blueprints, wood cogs, and the husk of a great bronze wheel. He's what people whisperingly call a Tokiaisher, a clock crafter, part artisan, part heretic, depending on whom you ask. Come to see the betrayal of tradition? He asks with a grin. You smile. He's not entirely joking. Mechanical clocks, Western style, with gears and springs and hours measured in equal lengths, are starting to make their way into Japan. Smuggled in at first through Portuguese merchants, then more widely adopted during the early Edo period as the need for standardized time increased. Railroads, official appointments, trade schedules, all things that don't wait for bell traders or incense coils. Umezawa gestures to a half-built Wadokei, a uniquely Japanese mechanical clock. Unlike European clocks, which divide the day into 24 equal hours, the Wadokei is engineered to match Japan's traditional unequal hour system, where daytime and nighttime hours shift with the seasons. His version has sliding hour plates that can be adjusted as days lengthen or shorten. It's beautiful. It's also deeply confusing. The Europeans love order, he says. We love rhythm. This clock tries to do both. You ask how people responded when they first saw it. They didn't trust it. Too quiet, he says. No gongs. No bells. Just ticking. Historians still debate whether these early clocks were adopted widely or reserved for nobility. Some say towns resisted them, preferring the comforting ambiguity of temple bells and festival drums. Others argue that once one merchant switched, the rest had to follow, or risk falling behind in literal business hours. Here's your odd detail. One early Japanese mechanical clock was designed to play poetry instead of chimes. Each hour, a haiku would be mechanically revealed via rotating scroll. It broke frequently, but when it worked, time sang. Umezawa shows you another piece. A tiny, palm-sized sundial meant to be carried on trips. It has an inscription, "Only fools count the minutes." He chuckles, probably made by a monk. And yet, even in his workshop, traditional timekeeping persists. A rice pot whistles just before the hour of the snake. His apprentice lights incense not by the clock, but when the workshop shadow touches a hanging fish charm. The old ways and the new have found a sort of truce, for now. You step outside as Umezawa returns to his tools, gently tightening the tension coil of a future no one fully trusts yet. The city around you is changing. Temples still toll. Bells still call. But signs now display opening times written in numerals. Traders refer to half past the hair. Children learn to read both scroll and dial. And in this merging of systems, bell and balance wheel, moonlight and minute hand, you see a kind of peace. Not a replacement. A layering point one rhythm slides beneath another. The human ear remains trained not just on tick-tock, but on wind, shadow, song, and step. Time, in the end, is still felt. Now, take a breath. Let the streets of Kyoto dim behind your mind's eye. The bells have rung. The candles flicker. The monks fold their robes in perfect, invisible unison. Imagine a final lantern, gently swinging from a gate. The wind lifts. The last reed pipe sounds its closing note. And you, warm under your blanket, still as a pond in moonlight, have followed a trail of sound, scent, and movement through a city without clocks. You've walked every path, sat by every drum, listened to every child crow, and whispered to a rice-field bell. Time did not hurry you, and it will wait for you now. Let your breathing slow. Let the rhythm fade. Let sleep arrive like a temple bell, soft, slow, and certain. End of script. Sweet dreams.